We've got a lot more content to cover for today, but we want to start with introducing our guest keynote speaker, Nancy Giordano. Nancy is a strategic futurist who helps organizations transform their escalating expectations ahead, and she's recognized as one of the top female futurists in the industry. She spent her career building, shaping, and evolving a $50 billion worth of global brands and has helped shape important conversations around tech, around business, and around society. She is the mother of 3. She speaks around the world about her new economic observations and is a frequent lecturer at the Singularity University. We are excited to have Nancy here. Please give her a VeeamON welcome. Nancy Giordano. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Oh, TEDx Austin. Always interesting to see what titles. Hey, everyone. I'm very, very excited to be with you all today. And it's interesting, as part of my credits about why I might be a relevant closing speaker, one of the things that was not mentioned is my absolute fascination with data. So to me, this is the case for audacious leadering, the data protection and agility and visibility addition, making it easier to make a really big difference. But the first thing I'm going to show you is probably the scariest thing you will see in my talk. This is a photo of my iPhone. And I will zoom in on one stat that y'all might pay attention to. Yes, I have 43,563 unopened emails. And I am a customer of Microsoft. OK, so take a deep breath. I showed this to or told a confidant and friend of mine that I was going to open this way. And he's like, make sure they know that you stay on top of your stuff. Make sure they know that you're really good at what you do. I'm like, of course I am. He's like, that stat does not prove that. So anyway, the thing is, though, the reason why does that happen, right? Because I'm a data hoarder. I live relatively simplistically in the rest of my life, but man, it is really, really hard for me to get rid of a photo or an email or a text or anything because, why? I've had data failures, right? I've lost things that were really, really important to me, and I couldn't get them back somehow. And I live for data. I live for information. That is how I do what it is that I do. It's how it makes sense of the world. And when it fails, it freaks me out. So for that reason alone, I am really grateful to be here and to be part of this event with you guys. And I promise it gets a little bit more interesting than that. Now, it was interesting. I spent some time learning about Veeam. And these 3 words about reliability and flexibility and simplicity are important to me because they translate into this kind of more humanistic thing, right? It gives me confidence. It gives me the right information when I need it. It creates relevance, which allows me to create insight. And so as we talk more about what the future is needing and expecting from us, I will make a case that becomes a really critical thing, right? We're looking at a future that is so dynamic and unknown. I was in an event recently with a Walmart executive who claimed that retail, let's just take one industry, for example, will change more in the next 5 years than it has in the last 50. There's another futurist who will claim that society will change more in the next 50 years than it has in the last 300. Sorry, in the next 20 years. Sorry, next 20 years more than it has in the last 300. That's a pretty extraordinary number. Let's say he's even off by 100 years. It's pretty extraordinary still that we will go through that rate of change. So as we start to imagine what that means for the world of work and how it is that we do what it is that we do, it becomes a very complex thing. We don't know how it's going to take shape. The first thing I invite us all to do is to take a deep breath. Right? This is a very strategic conversation. I'm a strategic futurist. I build strategies to make it to the future. And I will argue that this is probably one of the most important things that we'll do. And I'm serious. A room of 2,000 people together, we're going to take 2 deep breaths. You've heard a lot of information in the last 2 days. Let's start with a sit up straight. All right, on the second breath, imagine all that information that you've heard over the last few days start to sink to the bottom of your brain and kind of fertilize the ground in there. All right, so one more. Now, do that partly for real, because I really do think it's an important strategy. And second, because selfishly, I want your brain open, because we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and we're going to talk about it quickly. I oriented to all these 2 questions, right? We don't know, again, what the future is going to exactly look like, but I can try and orient from these 2 places. What does the future need and expect from us? As we look at all this data and we synthesize it, what picture does it paint? And then, what are we each in a unique position to create and contribute to that future? And that's as an individual, that's as an organization, and that's as an industry. We can scope it all different ways. And actually, scope becomes an important part of the future. As you take in this information, I invite you to do it through 3 lenses. The first is as a professional. We always come to these events because we want to be able to do our work better tomorrow, right? That's how we justify coming to beautiful Miami Beach. But you're also a human that is going through this. You're a parent, you're a son or a daughter, you are part of a community that is wrestling with many of these questions. It's hitting us personally, not just professionally. And increasingly, we're being asked to think about this as a member of society. This is not scoped just to our work, right, or just to our home lives. We're increasingly asked to think about this bigger, which makes the future that much more complex. Because it's not just about speed and about scale, it's also about scope. It's also a tremendous invitation to be able to make a really big difference. I'll start with 2 stories that help me orient to what the future needs and expect, and why I call this presentation the case for audacious leadering. So in a crowd this size, it's hard to know, but who knows what this building is? I'm going to quickly sort of do a little shout out. Interestingly, very few people do know what this is, but this is a current building in Seattle that is part of Amazon's campus there. Right? It's a brand new part of their HQ in Seattle. It's called the Spheres. You can Google it. It's a really, really fascinating building. Now, what's interesting about that building, right, is that when you're walking down the streets of Seattle, and you're past one big office tower after one big office tower after another big office tower, and you turn the corner, this is crazy. It defies every rule about how you use corporate real estate efficiently, right? How you're supposed to be able to make sure the work gets done and the productivity is met. That's part of Amazon's wonderful challenge, is the fact that they challenge every assumption. It's why they're able to think about business models differently, why they're able to think about retail differently, why they're able to think about collaboration and partners differently, right? They do so much differently because they challenge every assumption. I was recently at an event with the CTO of Amazon who'd give a whole talk about how they are oriented toward yes. That is a really critical part of what makes them successful. All right, here's another. Imagine you're at the airport one day and you see a young pregnant mom traveling with a 2-year-old and no other help. And the 2-year-old's having one of those moments where they're running around the airport and they're just, having a wild moment. And the mother's doing everything she possibly can to calm down and control the situation, but she can't. And at some point, she just sits down and overwhelmed and starts weeping. And what happens next is extraordinary. 6 women that do not know each other step out of whatever line or seat they're in, and they quietly encircle the mom. One starts singing Itsy Bitsy Spider. One pulls out a toy. One pulls out a snack. One helps mom with a sippy cup. And the whole thing de-escalates, right? The son comes and sits on the mother's lap. They take a deep breath. And the mother and the son are able to get on the plane calmly, happily. And then what happens next? Nothing. The women just disband. They go back to where it was that they were sitting or standing prior. No one asked for permission. No one asked for a guidebook. No one formed a group. No one asked for a promotion. No one went on vacation together. No one started a Facebook group, right? The only thing we know about is that someone was touched by the experience and did put it on social media. But to me, it's an extraordinary case of just showing up, seeing something, taking agency, trusting that you've got something to bring to it, organically coordinating, and then moving on, right? There's another opportunity. So I will make a case that these 2 things together, right, being both really audacious, bold, and rule, challenging, if not breaking, and humanistic and compassionate and organic are the keys to the future. Why? This is the world we live in now, right? We're in a place where we're demanding more and more and more. Quality, innovation, transparency, personalization, speed, flexibility, resilience. We could go on and on and on. Traceability. We could make that longer if the screen were wider. And at the same time, we're often willing to give less. Time, energy, complexity, loyalty, and often money. Money is the only one that's a little bit more flexible. We'll pay for a great experience. So this is the tension that exists in all businesses right now. And does anyone think that that is going to get any slower? No, right? Because in the world of data, and I don't know if anybody, maybe Veeam was the person who created this stat. I don't know, somebody did the math on this one and says that apparently every day we create 2.5 quintillion, somebody also made up that word, bytes of data. It's a lot of data. And that's before my toothbrush starts talking to my refrigerator, before my pillow is able to start recording my dreams and giving me a little analysis the next day, right? Before my Tupperware has sensors in it. I mean, we're going to have more and more of this data that we are creating. Someone also did the math, which I think is fascinating, that said this is equivalent to 10 million Blu-ray discs, that if stacked on top of one another would be the equivalent of 4 Eiffel Towers every day. You are the people who are living with this. You're the people who have to help make sense of this and make sure that we back up the stuff that matters and maybe let go of the stuff that doesn't. That's the issue with my phone, right? I know that all those emails are not relevant, but they were relevant for 30 days. And I don't know how to go back then and get rid of them. The reality is technology is changing, information is growing, and culture is shifting, not just faster and faster, my friends, but exponentially. I am a guest lecturer with Singularity University. If you guys spend any time with anything that Singularity does, this is really the cry for Ray Kurzweil or VeeamON and the gang. And part of the messaging here is that it is deceiving. We think that nothing is happening. And sometimes we even get disillusioned, right? It kind of goes down and says, oh, the whole AI spring turns into AI winter. Or, gosh, virtual reality, we've been talking about it forever. Nothing's happened yet. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, when enough data is available to actually make that happen, and or the computation power or the storage power or the hardware that goes with it, et cetera. So there's a lot of component parts that go to it, but I will say data is a big, big driver to this. Elon Musk just made the exact same comment at the Tesla event the other day, right? Another way to think about this is someone asked Ernest Hemingway how he lost his money, and apparently he said gradually and then suddenly. So that is the world that we're living in. It comes out of nowhere, supposedly. So how do you prepare for that? Well, Mark Twain gave us a hint when he said, you can't trust your judgment if your imagination's out of focus. So we're going to buckle up and we're going to take a ride into the future that I see. I get to spend a lot of time with the architects who are building the future, technologists, designers, scientists, entrepreneurs, right? I don't know all the people who are building this stuff, but I know a lot of them, right? And it's really amazing to see what is happening already. I built a map years ago on helping clients understand sort of the differences between the old economy and the new economy. These were all the big shifts that were happening that defined the new economy, and it was very, very different than the old. I will take us now quickly through 4 of them, and I will try not to speak too fast. It is a part of my issue because I'm very excited about the future and all the things that it holds, and I want to share as much of this as I can. Part of the reason I became a speaker is because as a strategist, I got frustrated that I could see solutions that meant the world was round, and many of my clients still thought the world was flat. And I cannot build something meaningful if we don't have a shared understanding of the shape that the world is in. So this is really a desire to help share the 4 big shifts and the mindsets that go with them, because this is not just about understanding the shift, it calls to a different kind of leadership or leadering or posture or approach. The first is a disruption mandate. This is nothing new to any of us about the fact that, before 2007, this did not exist, which means before 2007, this did not exist, right? We'd give up a finger. There's another study that talks about our limb. I actually thought, I'm like, oh, prostheses are kind of pretty. Whole conversation about we'd lose our wallet before we lose our phone. Like, these have become really important to us, not because the hardware is so gorgeous, right? It's ridiculous to carry this thing around all the time, be so attached to it. But this is why. It opened up an entire world of being able to do things that we could not do before. Square, completely democratized retail. Now, I do have 3 children. My youngest is 15, my daughter, and she cannot believe that we ever got anywhere successfully between A and B without Google Maps. Right? She asks me all the time, like, seriously, like, you wrote down each step. I'm like, yes. Or we went to this big paper book, and we said we went from D10 down to B2. And then we had to flip the page and get it right. And she's like, what? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But not only was it that it's more convenient, but this oriented everything now so that we are where? In the center of the map. We are no longer in a corner trying to orient our way. We are now at the center of the map. This is part of what started the whole personalization thing. We want the whole thing kind of oriented around us and what we need and how we need it. Also interesting here, right? Every one of these apps did something to completely disrupt transportation, the payments industry, the hospitality industry, the dating industry, the music industry, et cetera. But if I had told you 12 years ago that there would be a company worth $6 or $7 billion, I'm not sure what they're worth now, based on the selfie, what would you have said? What the hell is a selfie, right? And how could it possibly become a communications platform for people under 20? Right? I still am flummoxed by that. And there's a data equivalent to this, by the way. I understand that snaps don't stick around forever, but I did call my daughter, again, last night. I said, hey, by the way, it does tell you on your phone, right, how many Snapchats you've sent back and forth. And she's like, oh. She goes, it's a really big number. I'm like, well, how big? And she made me guess, and I came really close, actually. Now, these are the numbers of Snapchats that she has received, not the ones that she has sent. And she, again, always says, but Mom, it's been around a really long time, right? So in the course of that really long time, my 15-year-old daughter has received 670,000 Snapchats. So just, you do the math on how many she's also sent, and it's like, kind of overwhelming. All right, that's the future, or that's the current. That's where we are now. So when we start to imagine, again, 12 years ago, none of this existed. When I start to list these technologies, and we start to say, what's going to happen next, we don't know, right? When all these things merge together, emerge, and converge, and inform each other, they will have a very, very profound effect on the world. People call this the fourth industrial revolution for a reason. We think it'll be that big a shift, right? That's why people make these claims that society will shift this dramatically in the next 300 years. I will say the next, or the next 20 years. Keep getting that one wrong. All right, so what does that look like now? I'm just going to run through quick examples of kind of what's happening currently. This is news from last week that the first autonomous a truck is now rolling through Sweden. It's actually got a very small runway. It can go up to 65 miles an hour. They're only letting it go 5, miles or kilometers an hour. They'll take all the data and they'll process it over the next few years. But this is coming. We've been talking about this for years, and here it is. This is the one that really I find provocative and raises a whole bunch of questions, and would for all of you as well. The Swedish startup who encouraged their employees to become microchipped, right? They are now apparently they have chipping parties throughout Sweden. There was a Wisconsin entrepreneur who thought this was fascinating and is bringing it back to the United States. So here are the questions to ask ourselves. Why would somebody do this? Convenience, I'd imagine. It's partly cool, but it's also convenient. I can open the door. I can get to the Coke machine. I can make a copy. I don't even have to have a phone now, right? I can just swipe my hand. Interesting, right? What does that mean in terms of data privacy and tracking? Are unions really excited about this? Not so much. Right? There's a big responsibility that comes with this whole thing. And the third question that I think is really provocative to ask ourselves is the gateway to start to think about how we will have machines embedded in our bodies. There's this real question about whether or not we would ever put hardware inside our bodies. Now, there's a person named Brian Johnson. He's a person who built the infrastructure of what became Venmo. It's called Braintree. Sold it to PayPal for $800-something million, and now is very committed to putting a chip inside our brains. It's called Kernel. He thinks it's the only way that we'll be able to keep up with machines. Now, I haven't kept up with Brian's work in the last year or two. Maybe he's pivoted to something else, but he was really keen on this. And if you're interested in seeing it, there's actually on my website on nancygiordano.com, I think, a panel discussion that I did with a guy who founded Siri and now Viv, with Brian and Kernel, and with a woman who's growing the future with genetic material. So it's a fascinating thing to think about. But this little thing starts to raise a whole bunch of questions. By the way, just on the lighter side, apparently, if you're in Canada, you can have a Slurpee drone to you. Good to know. Right, back to expectations. Now, this is funny, and I can't imagine somebody's actually doing this. It just looks so crazy to me. Right? But drone delivery is here. You guys have probably read the headlines, right? That Google has now been approved by the FAA to start drone deliveries in a little area of Virginia. The company's called Wing. If you have a moment, you want to Google, how does Wing work? There's a great 1-minute video that I decided not to include today. But it just shows a mom in the kitchen with this really quaint, ancient music, who at 1:54 decides she needs something, goes to her phone, chooses the item. She and her toddlers play for the next 8 to 10 minutes. Google figures out a way to put it in a little box, stick it in the drone, send it over, and a string comes down and pulleys it down, and the toddler runs to the box, picks it up, and brings it to mom. Very exciting moment. Think about what that kid's future is going to be and what their expectations are for things to be delivered on demand, right? And shorter windows. And think about what the sky is going to look like and the data that comes with that. One of my 3 children worked for a drone software management company that was all about thinking about the data that's going to come into that and how we use that to price insurance and to think about a bunch of other actuarial tasks. Which leads us into something like this. This is currently, if you guys, again, may or may not be familiar with it, Forbes did an interesting story on lemonade recently. But what's fascinating is Lemonade is an insurance company, property and casualty insurance company, that did not exist several years ago. It was founded by two men who knew nothing about insurance before 2015, but decided this was an area that was ripe for disruption. They really are trying to bring the cost down and make the whole process more fluid, and I would even, frictionless, but fluid, for two technologies. One is artificial intelligence, and the other is behavioral economics. If we can bring down the bureaucracy and certainly pull out as much fraud as possible, it makes it possible to offer insurance at a very competitive, not lower rate, in which I get insured in 90 seconds and get a claim paid in 3 minutes. Now, the other thing that chipping thing does, right, it also talks about the fact that we will have fluid transactions. Things will happen in micro moments, right? As something talks to something and they work it all out, at some point it might even take 30 seconds to get a claim sorted, and I won't even be aware of it. It'll just, the machines will talk to each other and work it out. They just got $300 million in additional investment. They're expanding now into Europe. SoftBank and Alliance Insurance are part of the people who are funding them. So then you talk to Next, and I only give one example now for Next, which is fascinating to me. It happened a few weeks ago that someone debuted a robot, it's about a foot high, that is artificially intelligent, and it can read Bible verses, but it doesn't just like go up to it and I tell them the Bible verse that I want. That wouldn't be that interesting. It actually reads who I am, right? Understands male, female, age, et cetera, and it reads my sentiment, and it chooses the Bible verse that is appropriate for me. Now, interestingly, they decided not to cross the line and interpret that Bible verse. Like, they could have made that choice as well, but they chose not to, right? Open to a lot of interpretation. But now you've got robotics meets AI, meets religion, meets sense of self. What does that future look like? Where else does that sort of roll out, right? What are all the questions that that one raises? So for me, when I look at this stuff, I don't think any one of those things is going to be the thing that's going to make the future, one way or another. It's about the connection between all these things. When the future has all of those things, it raises questions around business models, intellectual property, certainly around ethics and privacy, right? About value, like how will I value something? How will I decide that this is what I want to pay for? Big article a day or two ago about artificially created, artificially, I guess, intelligent music and art that's created. What is the actual monetary worth of that? And the skills that will be needed as we move forward, amongst many, many other questions. So the first thing I invite us all to do is to wonder versus resist. Someone taught me a few years ago that wonder and resistance can't coexist. So I do invite us to be in a place of wonder. What if? What problem are they trying to solve for? How can we do this differently or better? What is our role? If this is what's happening, how can we compete? Marriott's doing something really interesting in the Airbnb space, right? Rather than trying to keep pushing Airbnb out with a whole bunch of regulation conversation, they decided to go and kind of join the party and do high-end kind of Airbnb stuff. What does it mean as a possibility for us? All right, which leads us to this permanent state of ambiguity. There are so many things happening at once. We will never actually know for sure that we're making the right decision anymore, right? There is not even a beginning and a middle and end to any transaction. They're all constant. So how do we navigate in a world that is changing this quickly and has this much going on? How do we know when it is the time to act? If you're in the military, you train with a really different mindset. You invite people to think about it in a VUCA world, right? How do we operate when it is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous? There, again, is no rule book. There is no chain of command. There is no hierarchy that will prepare you for every situation when you're in the military. We have to prepare soldiers to be able to act dynamically, like the women at the airport. What happens here in business is that we often stop making decisions, right? We want to know that the killer app is here, or now is the right time, or it's really been proven, or that somehow it's been validated or verified. But often when that happens, it potentially could be too late. Or at least we need to figure out a way to take baby steps to learn, because part of it is this learning feeds that learning, feeds this learning, right? We can't necessarily always jump to the third step. We're in an FIO world. The woman who's CEO of YouTube describes it as, when she's interviewing people for FIO jobs. What's FIO? Figure it out. People go, I don't know how to do that. She goes, nobody knows how to do it. You've got to figure it out, right? These things don't exist yet. No one has done it before. So how do we build capacity for, and how do we encourage people to feel safe in an environment in which they have to FIO it? Part of it is the rise of the Agile Mindset. Right? I've tried not to get too strategic in this talk, but this is one that's really worth Googling if you need to have a conversation with anybody else in your team about what Agile Mindset means, which is that it's not that we spend a ton of money on R&D and make sure that we get it right. It's that we start with the most basic way of being able to solve the problem. A skateboard turns into a scooter, turns into a bike, and into a motorbike, and into a car, right? The first iPhone did not look anything like the iPhone does now. Or maybe it looked similar, but it operated quite differently. It had so many less features and benefits than it has now. They learned along the way. The software caught up, the computation caught up, the battery power caught up, whatever it is. But the first phone was still really useful and changed the game. So how do we help build this into our processes? And it's not just a software thing. It could be an HR process, an accounting process, a hiring process, an onboarding process, anything. This is how, in my opinion, Satya Nadella changed Microsoft. And anyone from here from Microsoft can help validate or correct my thinking, right? But it was about teaching people that they have agency to go create something and that it can start small. It should start small. It's also about this idea of uncommon partnerships. And I could go on and on about the different ways in which that looks. One of the things that it raises is the fact that you've got disparate companies that are coming together, like Pizza Hut and Toyota, to build a self-driving pizza delivery van. Cool. Also exploits a law that if you don't have a person in a vehicle, you can have a working pizza oven. That raises expectations for hot delivered pizza to my door. It's about the fact that you see competitors on a retail stage become collaborators on a high-tech stage. Like Honda just invested $2.75 billion in GM's technology for self-driving cars. Right? They were able to set it up in a way that I could be a competitor here and a collaborator here. Who could we collaborate with? But the one that I find super fascinating is this one. So 11 years ago in Houston, Texas, two enterprising groups got together and realized they could learn from each other. Petroleum engineers and cardiologists. Right? Why? Because they're both pumping fluid through a tube. And they're trying to figure out how to do it more efficiently, right? What are the role of sensors? What's the role of data? What's the role of all that stuff? Look at that logo. It is beautiful, right? Pumps and pipes. It still continues to this day. It now includes people in medicine and aerospace and other industries. But I just think it's fascinating that that's where that curiosity started from. What can I learn from someone in an analogous but very different industry? This is where the value of diverse thinking comes from. So I will make a pitch here again about the fact that we should have more and more diversity in our teams. California became the first state to require women to be on corporate boards. Really just because we're PC? No, right? Because what they found in all the research and the data is that companies that have women in leadership are more profitable. This is an ad from L'Oreal, but 15% more profitability, at least. Definitely decision making is different. And it's not just feminine, right, or putting more women on it. It's about having people from different backgrounds, different thinking, different educations, different anything that we can. And where is this going to be most crucial? Artificial intelligence. This is a world in which I work. I will tell you that we are right now dominated by a very homogenous looking group of people who are making decisions. And one of the key things, back to permanent ambiguity, is AI is probabilistic, right? It's not deterministic. We put it in and we start to learn and start to take shape. It's organic. We need to watch for it. And one of the biggest watch outs is bias, either in how it was trained or what we're asking it to do. And the more people that we've got around, it's not because anyone's bad and can't think it through, but we just have different perspectives that add to the value of that. So I will implore us to think about this from all domains. And what will it take to be able to build more diverse teams? It's part of what's called developing our AQ, our adaptability quotient. This is not so much, again, about EQ or IQ. This is now about AQ. And the great news about an AQ is you can develop it. It's a capacity that we can all get better at. We're aware of it. So I would argue, again, curiosity is a part of that, and collaboration is a part of that. Agile thinking is a part of that. Diverse teams are a part of that. It allows us to think of VUCA in a much more empowering way. I heard someone on the stage, I got to watch the talks from yesterday, although I wasn't here, right? And I think it was Danny who talked about that we're on a journey. We haven't all figured it out. We're on a journey. But gosh, it's better to say that we're on a journey that looks like this than the one in which we're always so frightened. So vision, understanding, collaboration, agility, those are capacities that are exciting. I describe that as learning to be a navigator versus a replicator. Most executives my age were taught that there is a guidebook, right? There is a way to do things, and it's about driving out efficiency. It is about minimizing risk. It's about building toward consistency. Why? So that we could scale effectively. TQM, Six Sigma, all those processes were designed to be able to become more and more efficient. And now we're in a culture where we have to become more and more curious. We have to learn. We have to think about things in a really different way. We have to learn to navigate new situations the same way that the military did, the same way the women at the airport did, versus replicate the old. Now, there's this whole interesting conversation about the cloud. I was privileged enough to be on a panel a few years ago with, I think it was the head of cloud computing, Bob Kelly from Microsoft. We were on the campus, and he was going on and on about the digital cloud, how it was going to enable so much of this future that we're excited about in terms of predictive analytics and big data and AI and solve big, huge world problems, and was so excited. And I just thought to myself, and then said out loud to these 450 analysts, what is the equivalent of the human cloud? What allows us to level up in that same way? And are social technologies keeping up with digital technologies? And there are a couple areas that I think we should pay attention to, and especially for you guys in this room. There's a whole long list of them, unfortunately, but there's two that I'm pointing out today. This is a little bit of the downer in the presentation, and we'll come back up. The first has to do with climate change. Right? This is something that certainly young people are very, very worried about and not just passionate about. So if you guys haven't met Greta Thunberg yet, she's on the cover of Time magazine this week, a 16-year-old out of Sweden who was really, really frustrated that her government wasn't taking it more seriously and doing more about it. So she committed every Friday afternoon to stand outside her parliament with a sign begging them to take action. In the world of social media, she becomes famous. She starts a whole worldwide movement amongst the youth, and in case your daughters or sons may have participated in Climate Change Day, in which all the kids took off from school around the world. This was in Africa. This is the picture from Berlin. This was in Estonia. This is in the United States. It was stunning to me that this much action was galvanized. The reason I bring it up for you guys is when we talk about data and data storage and how we all do this, the energy component to this is an important part. Right? Having big, huge cloud servers is something that concerns people. And increasingly, people are going to be looking at how we do this more and more efficiently and more effectively. But the one that actually I spend more time thinking about in the last few years is about this epidemic of loneliness. You guys have probably read more and more about it. I think there's an NPR special about it this weekend. Now, interesting, when we talk about loneliness, we often think about the widow that we're building a robot for to keep her company. And there is some of that going on. Or we think about the single parent at the airport with a toddler. But interestingly, what we're finding is that there are two areas that are really the growth drivers, if you will, for loneliness, unfortunately, which is millennials and even at work. The fact that loneliness is now part of an issue that we need to deal with at work, right? Because we're so focused on transaction that we forget to connect to one another. And it reduces productivity. The former Surgeon General will tell you loneliness is twice as deadly as obesity. It's really something we need to be paying attention to, and it's showing up in lots of different ways. But I go back to, how do we solve the problem, right? It's easy to get caught up in it. How do we solve it? The other thing, before I go there, David Brooks will say first, you name it. So David Brooks, a pretty conservative New York Times columnist, will say that when historians define this era, they may well see it above all else as a time defined by fear. So I would argue compassion becomes a big part of this, right? Not everyone is looking at the future through the same lens and getting as excited about it. And people feel worried about dislocation. People feel worried about, again, climate change. People feel worried about a whole bunch of things. What can we do to make them feel better? Well, the first is to take responsibility. What's interesting is to see employees now rise up and ask their companies to go, address these issues. So whether you're at Microsoft and talking about facial recognition technology and ICE, whether you're at Google and thinking about AI and how it's used as part of military programs and DARPA, or whether it is the Amazon employees for climate change or climate justice that have formed and written an open letter to both Jeff Bezos and the board asking them to think about the packaging for their products. Right? So when we talk about the future of work, one of the really big things is how we'll be holding companies accountable for the choices they make around a range of different things, not just bottom line in terms of ROI and shareholder return. It's also about the rise of community. It's about the fact that we want to be in connection with each other. WeWork is a $45 or $46 billion company. Questions around WeWork, but overall, the fact they were able to build to this scale is because they offered something really important, which was not just a space to go work. You could rent a desk for years, but they created a community where people on the edge, in particular, who are creating all the time, want to be connected to one another. They're also now moving into WeLive. I would argue for the importance of being human. This is the single most important social technology. Work out of Harvard that shows if you would like to have a more effective brainstorming meeting, start with a personal story, an embarrassing story. When I tell you about the excruciating thing that happened to me in 6th grade, and you tell me about your stories, and suddenly throwing out risky ideas seems really easy, right? And we can collaborate more easily. There's lots and lots of work about effective teams, that if we're able to get to this place of connectivity, we have so much better outcome. Now, here's the deal. We often think that this is a waste of time. If I encourage you to start every meeting with a 30-second story, first car, best Halloween costume, bucket list vacation, right? It doesn't have to be high stakes or high vulnerability, but imagine the connectivity that creates. There was someone who actually came up to me at the end of an enterprise software event who has a distributed team of 200 people, and he's really worried about that loneliness, dislocation thing, and asked about how to solve it. And I was like, well, what about on a call? We start with something like this, a story. You know, I don't know if it's working or not, but I know that it can't hurt. And I really don't think in any way it is going to reduce productivity. I will argue it increases people's sense of feeling connected to each other. And I will also then say it is so important that we are not only human, but we also build trust. The amount of data that we're going to have insight into various people's lives with is extraordinary. This is just a great thing that talks about Alexa. The voice revolution has only just begun. Today, Alexa is a humble servant, but very soon, she could be much more. A teacher, a therapist, a confidant, an informant, right? So imagine again, so I have worked on artificial intelligence apps that have a lot of insight into people. We can use that insight to empower people or to exploit them, to serve them or to stalk them. Clearly, you guys know where I would land on those. And not just because I think it's the right thing to do. It literally is the thing that will build our businesses moving forward. People will judge who they want to do business with by how well they take care of me and my data and the insight that you have on me. My thesis is just this simple, right? We all deserve to be better held by each other in environments, again, in which we can have differing points of views, in which we are compassionate, in which we are respectful, in which we are open. Right? By the systems we design, there's a whole systems piece I could go into right now about the incongruence between what we ask people to do and how we incentivize people often to do it. And the last is about the technologies that we advance, building it with a real sense of compassion and empathy and thoughtfulness, right, about what we'll be held to task of in the future. You're watching the breakdowns now of companies that don't think about that or didn't think enough about it. We have the foresight now. We can think about it with what it is that we're going to build. That, to me, is a whole definition of leadership that looks different. I call it leadering versus leadership. Leadering is dynamic. Leadering is compassionate. Leadering is thinking ahead. Leadering is flat. There's a whole bunch of things that leadering shows up as that's different than what we've historically described as leadership. And maybe it is what you've already done, but just by labeling it differently, it changes the way that we are oriented. Right? Sometimes language becomes the leader of what it is that we do, or the thing that guides us. All right, we're almost done. So here's the deal. It's all connected, right? There isn't something that is not connected to something else. We can talk about externalities. We can talk about a lot of different things. I will say our mood around these technologies and what it is that we can do with them is greatly informed, again, by how the stories that we tell, whether or not we are optimistic or not optimistic, and how we feel about this. I cannot implore enough, for me, the importance of a positive narrative. If you have a teenager in your life, that teenager needs to know that the future is abundant, that future is great, that future is thriving, and that they have a place in it. Because so much of the storytelling right now, when we start talking about the future and about, again, data and about AI and about all that stuff can be really scary. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't take it seriously. We absolutely should. But wow, there's a million great things that are going to happen in this future. Right? I get very excited about what's possible. I built a whole career fair for the future for college and high school kids, congruent with South by Southwest, so that they would be able to touch and feel the positivity of the future. These are the kinds of stories I want them to know, and I want you all to know, right? AI took a test to detect lung cancer, and it got an A. So the fact is, yes, AI can now look at X-rays, and through a range of different technologies, be as precise as a physician could be, or a radiologist could be, but also do it faster. And one would argue then cheaper. If we can make cheaper, we can make it more available. That's great news. There's a startup in Austin that has debuted a house that can be 3D printed. Right now, it's about 24 hours. It was $12,000. It's now gone down to $7,000. That's not good enough. They're trying to get it down to 12 hours and $4,000 to build a really cute, great house. You can go online, Icon, I-C-O-N, I think it's the company that, well, that's definitely part of the company. I think they have a video on their website that shows you how it's built. They're really trying to solve the humanitarian crisis around homelessness, particularly around the world, provide dignified homes for such a low amount of money. Now, again, good news or bad news, depending on where you are. If you're a sheetrock manufacturer, a little scary. If you're a sheetrock manufacturer committed to building high-quality homes for people at the most affordable rate, it's phenomenal news. This is exciting. And this, to me, is the most audacious. So in China, and we can talk a lot about the pros and cons of how China makes business decisions and data decisions. But one of the things I think is fascinating, this is right now an architectural rendering, but in Shanghai, they are proposing a 100-hectare vertical interactive farm that will have a lot of technology built into it, but it is designed to do a few things, right? It makes it pretty. It improves air quality, but they're intentionally planting things that will create food that will help feed 24 million people, the residents of Shanghai. That's audacious, my friend. That's exciting. So when we have the opportunity, right, we should be bold. Over the course of history, our single greatest vulnerability has been our lack of imagination, says the former Joint Chiefs of Staff. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It's not that we can't do it, it's that we don't even think to do it. We haven't thought that that's possible. Those guys who are reinventing insurance had this bold imagination, and they will literally look at us and say, as legacy players, you're locked into places where you can't move as quickly as we can move, right? So it's about imagination and then agility. Please be audacious. I go into many, many organizations who want to move the needle 10%. 10% isn't going to cut it in this future. We actually need to be much bolder. I know we need to always worry about the current business. There's a lot of questions about how to manage current while we manage the next. But we have to figure out a way to do that better. And I would argue at Amazon, they don't really have that conversation, right? Everything is to figure out how to be audacious and how to move forward. So as we wrap up, I will say again, breathe deeply and often as we approach this future. Seriously, take good care of yourself. I didn't put the whole slide in about mindfulness and how important that is, right? But really, we need to take good care of ourselves and our teams and our families and society as we navigate forward. Playing big requires a different outlook. It is about to be in a place, it's about being in a place in which we wonder versus resist, navigate versus replicate, think about leadership from a more dynamic and inclusive leadering place, and be audacious versus incremental. When you think about, again, the kind of leader that you want to be, or the kind of environment that you want to create for the work in which it is that you do, and we look to potentially these as a guide, and we ask ourselves, I'll ask you, right, as you're taking that deep breath, to think about what does the future need and expect from you? What are you in a position to create and contribute to that future? When I go back to this list here that we started with at the beginning, right, reliability, flexibility, simplicity adds to confidence, relevance, and insight, I'll add one more, which to me, collaboration is really critical to creating empathy. This is the toolkit moving forward, right? If I can be confident in what I'm doing and trust in it, if I can feel like I get the right relevant insight or information to create the insight and the idea, and I've got others with which it is that I can do it, and I have more insight into how to do that, imagine what is possible. This is the future. We are building it right now. Nobody else is building it. Y'all, we are building it. Each audience I get to speak with is building it. If you wonder if you're up for the task, I'll leave you with this.
When you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
There you have it. There's the secret. That's it. You know, the fact is, we are all doing work that is really, really important. I appreciate the way in which you guys are here learning about how to do it in a way that is big and bold and playing big. Your playing small does not serve the world, says Marianne Williamson, one of the 23 candidates running for president right now. It's an important message. It changed my life when I thought about it, and I invite you all to be part of the future that I want to build. It's going to be bright. It's going to be inclusive. It's going to be thriving. It's going to be extraordinary. And thanks for playing your part in it. Thanks.